Message of a Flower, The Divine Immanence in Nature by Henry Thomas Hamblin. Chapter 5. From the Unseen to the Seen. A flower receives direct from the Creator's hand all that it needs for its perfect unfoldment. The gentle rains feed it and wash it, and when the skies are clear, it is refreshed by the dew. It lives a life of true opulence. In the early morning it is covered with diamonds, each drop of dew a shining sphere, a miniature sun, a faithful representative of the light which proceeds from the divine. God in the flower, God in the dewdrop. The flower receives all that it needs. In the soil in which it grows are contained all the substances, other than light and air and water, that it needs. Many subtle chemicals are hidden in the soil, the Earth Mother providing her children with all the nourishment that they need. As the gentle rain falls from the sky and sinks into the earth, it sets free the nourishment for the hungry roots. The environment is provided out of which the flower can manufacture its own beauty. Its beauty does not fall upon it from the sky. The flower has to evolve from within. The flower's success in expressing beauty does not come from without, but from within. Its life is one of constant activity. From the time the seed is put in the ground onwards, the little plant is struggling and striving, but without strain or worry, ever seeking to express itself more perfectly. The substances which are set free from the soil by the rain, the dew, and the light and the air would all be futile if the plant did not make use of them. Perfection does not come without application. It can only be attained through persistence and perseverance. The effort and application of a flower are, however, very different from the labour and joyless strivings of man. It is a joy to express the inherent divine perfection, and wonderfully rewarding to grow and show forth beauty and loveliness. The effort is without strain, worry, or anxiety. It is just as joyful as the playfulness of a kitten in the sun. It is as if the flower is saying, "Oh, weary-hearted man, can you not make your work also a joyous, light-hearted expression of the divine?" Again, the beauty which we see expressed above the ground is the effect of something which has taken place underground. If it were not for the hidden root and the work which the root does, there could be no blossom, no leaf, no beauty. The flower depends upon its root more than anything. Its delicate fibres are constantly spreading and searching for nourishment from the Earth Mother. Before it can manifest in the seen, the plant must work in the unseen. The more vigorously it works underneath the ground, the greater will be the growth above the ground. The amount of beauty that a flower manifests, together with the vigour of its growth, are the measure of its work in the unseen. But for the work underneath the ground, there could be no strength of stalk or leaf, no beautiful blossom to cheer and enrich our lives. What is true of the plant is true of every son of man. The reason man is so weak and helpless, and his life so barren of beauty and true achievement, is because he works entirely in the seen and ignores the greater life of the unseen. Man is constantly striving in the world of effect and neglects the greater world of cause. Largely, mankind lives entirely the objective life of the senses. By the materialistic nature of our thoughts, we cut ourselves off from our invisible, divine, spiritual source. Therefore, his life is poor and impoverished, like a plant that is starved of vital minerals. Although man prides himself on his intellect, yet he pollutes nature wherever he goes. Instead of the fairy glen, filled with indescribable beauties and enchantments, the singing birds, the trees, flowers, grasses, and sweet odours, man has built ugly concrete buildings and high-rise flats, which by their soulless nature are an oppressive influence on those who live in them. Oh, for a change from the alley drear to the shores where the surges sweep, and the breath of heaven comes softly in from the wastes of the mighty deep. Jesus wept over Jerusalem, and if he were here today, he would find tears enough to shed over the places in the world where people still live in poverty and slums. This is largely the work of vanity, greed, and intellectual arrogance. This disfigurement of the earth is the work of man divorced from God by his own disharmonious thoughts and beliefs. This is a result of living the life of the senses and ignoring the inner life of the spirit, of relying on the evidence of the senses instead of listening to the inward voice of the spirit. Man is like a plant whose roots are defective and which cannot therefore bring forth blossoms, for it does not draw from the earth the nourishment that it needs. Man does not work in the unseen. Therefore he cannot accomplish anything worthwhile in the seen. His life is stunted, dwarfed, and lacks true achievement, because his inner life is neglected and ignored. It produces ugliness and destruction instead of beauty and harmonious development. In the inward life of the spirit is the source and cause of all beauty of expression, all lofty achievement, all true success in the outward life of the senses. Yet within himself alone, man can discover the energy, wisdom, and inspiration that can make his life sublime. It is only from within that man can draw upon inexhaustible powers for the achievement of lofty ideals and the rendering of highest service. Consider for a moment the life of the average man who neglects the inward source of power. Firstly, he lacks wisdom. Instead of being guided in truth and led into the path of spiritual attainment, he blunders on in blindness and ignorance. Not realizing that things are not what they seem, and that the evidence of the senses can be so misleading as to be generally almost the exact opposite of truth, he continually acts in a way that brings unhappiness into his life. He seems to be plagued by negative influences from which he cannot escape. He thinks that by making money he can become happy, and then finds, to his dismay, that when he has made money, happiness is more elusive than ever. If he becomes successful in one thing, he fails lamentably in another. As soon as he overcomes one obstacle, another appears. For instance, he may climb from poverty to wealth and then have his home filled with discord or illness. Life then becomes a succession of expensive operations, consultations with learned specialists, hiring of trained nurses. It is full of anxiety and care. He then realizes that a poor man with a healthy wife and family is better off than himself. Blindly he stumbles on, never seeming to be able to rid his life of negative conditions, but instead only meeting its changed form in another debilitating set of circumstances. When faced by the many problems of life, he has nowhere to turn for guidance and direction. He has no inward conviction telling him which way to go. Instead, he has to depend on his own finite understanding, the evidence of his senses, the experiences of other people. Therefore, he comes, in every case, to a wrong decision. Secondly, he lacks inspiration. All inspiration comes from within. It springs from within the superconscious mind, yet it fails to manifest in those who live entirely the objective life of the senses. All men and women of great achievement have made a point of setting aside time to be alone in order to obtain inspiration from within. Although they were probably not conversant with the laws of which they were making use, instinctively they sat in the silence to meditate and reflect, and drew from their superconscious mind the inspiration that they needed. But the average person thinks that he can do without that which is the greatest to have always found necessary, and consequently lives their lives entirely in their senses, and with disastrous results. No wonder man's life lacks inspiration and true achievement. No wonder his highest efforts fail to find an echo in other hearts. No wonder he is neglected by the world. For one who is not himself inspired can never arouse enthusiasm in others. He wonders why, in spite of all his striving, his work is mediocre, so lacking in the divine quality of originality. Thirdly, he lacks power. By the disharmonious nature of his thoughts, man separates himself from his divine source. He relies upon his feeble, finite powers instead of connecting himself with the source of the universe. Therefore, all that he does is accomplished by huge effort and painful striving, and when he has done all, it is hardly worth the effort. The only achievements in world history that have been worth doing, and which have endured, have been the result of spiritual insight and inspiration. Here, spiritual achievement has remained long after its originator has passed on. And these lofty ideals are born of the spirit. They spring from the superconscious mind. They are the fruit of divine inspiration. No wonder man's life is ugly and depressed. He cuts himself off from his root life, from his divine source of all power, inspiration, and wisdom. Before man can achieve something really worthwhile, he must do as the flowers do, work in the unseen, and there draw upon infinite supplies. Just as the beauty of a flower depends upon its root growth, so does man's life and achievement depend upon the work that he does in the silence. Within every flower is hidden the divine ideal. There is within it an urge which makes it ever strive after a more perfect expression. Within man is hidden the same divine ideal, the infinite perfection striving to find expression in his life. But unless he listens in the silence of reflection and meditation, he cannot access wisdom or become conscious of the divine in order to align his ideals with it. He remains lifeless and uninspired. Seek first the kingdom, and all these things shall be added unto you, said Jesus. And his words are as true in these days of complicated finance as they were in the simpler days when he preached on the shores of the Galilean Sea. The amount of true success that we can demonstrate in our outward life is directly proportional to the amount of time that we devote to the spiritual inner life. When man finds his inner center, he discovers that he has true creative power, and what he creates in the unseen becomes manifest in the seen. The development of creative power demands very earnest effort. The building up in the mind of the ideal, the self that is to be, demands mental activity, perseverance, and concentration. But these are well repaid, for those who accomplish in the unseen succeed in life without apparent effort, can afford to hold success very lightly, and therefore are not the slaves of their own success. Great leaders of industry, men and women of imagination and vision who guide the affairs of nations, may not be given to prayer or entering the silence as we know it, but unconsciously they practice what amounts to the same thing. They spend time alone and think in undisturbed quietness. And when they have exhausted all the resources of objective thinking, they dismiss the matter and rely upon inspiration. This is very similar to the Christian casting his care upon the Lord and relying on God for an answer. They both rely upon the superconscious mind, which is in touch with the universal intelligence, to find an answer to problems which the objective mind can never solve. The roots of a flower are always at work, continually drawing nourishment from the earth, which it transmutes into beauty and loveliness. In the same way, man can, by meditation and real prayer, so train his inner mind that in time it constantly draws upon its divine source and brings the power of the infinite into expression. Then, and only then, does his life manifest beauty instead of ugliness, love instead of hate, harmony instead of discord.